When an artist submitted work to the Academy, several months prior to the exhibit, the Academy mulled over all the thousands of pieces of art submitted, and here's an unhappy person, just a sketch of a rejected painter. So we can kind of laugh at this. He's pointing at a rather simple subject here, a candle with a candle snuffer next to it. Of course, he's very indignant because the ignorant fools at the Academy have rejected his work for exhibit. That also means they would have stamped a big red R on the back of it, so that ever after, if he tried to market this painting, the question would come up as to how worthy it was, because the Academy had clearly rejected it. Let's take a look at this second revolution in art, the attempt to change the direction of art around 1848, Millet, Courbet, and the Barbizon school. And another interesting term, the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. Let's take a look at these. First of all, this painting, The Gleaners, it did something that the Academy didn't see within the scope of high art. It was once again a very simple scene, a peasant scene, but it was done in such a way that it actually lent great dignity to this activity. And at the time, society really didn't regard the labors of peasants as anything that was very dignified. Now, this painting also didn't make fun of the peasants, as did the earlier works of Bruegel in the peasant lifestyle genre. So people didn't know quite what to make of this. The Academy was rather confused by why the artist would have chosen this subject matter, although the artist was definitely very skilled in portraying his subject matter, but the subject matter wasn't what it should have been as far as the Academy was concerned. And another painting by Gustave Courbet in a very similar vein. This one chose subject matter that kind of spoofed artists of the time. The actual artist, Courbet, is pictured at the right, and he's bumped into a wealthy patron here with his servant whose eyes are dutifully lowered. He's wandering around in the countryside with his kit pack on, that is the artist, and he's got everything he needs to paint. So he's going to go out and find a scene and paint it right there. This is called plein air painting because it's not staged in a studio, and it could even be done entirely in the field, although sometimes an artist would go out and develop a sketch and then come back and develop it further in his studio. But the development of pigments that could be sold in tubes and could be carried around fostered this sort of a phenomenon. Artists who wanted to do this actually could buy some colors and take them out into the field to do this. This was a new development, and it arose as a result not of the folks who manufactured colorants addressing the needs of artists, but because the development of chemistry in service of the textile industry. Chemists had been trying for a long time to isolate the chemicals in natural pigments like indigo, and they felt if they could isolate what it is that gave the indigo its color, or madder root for a red color, indigo for blue, if they could isolate that chemical, perhaps they could concoct it by manufacturing it from other substances. And in fact, that's really what they set out to do, so they could manufacture large quantities of colorants and dyes for the textile industry. But as an offshoot of that, it was possible to use some of these new substances that were concocted as synthetic pigments. And that had already begun by the 1850s with some breakthroughs in organic chemistry. So here we have Courbet carrying his artist kit here out into the field, meeting a potential client. The thing that the Academy didn't care for in this, in addition to the use of the coloring being rather vivid, was the subject matter. It sort of made fun of the artists. Artists were very much interested in being thought of as intellectuals, and here we had somebody who looked like a country bumpkin wandering around outside, and that's where he was going to do his painting. This was kind of a slap in the face at the Academy, who had already by this time rejected a number of works by Courbet. Finally, we come to the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. This was rather a short-lived movement. Around 1850 to 1855, Dante Rossetti and a number of other artists joined together, originally meeting in the town of Barbizon in France. It was their strong feeling that art had gone wrong, not just with the Academy, but all the way back in the Renaissance at the time of Raphael. They felt that Raphael had started this style of beautifying things in a way that made them artificial and detracted from the depictions. So their intent was actually to go back to a period prior to Raphael's having done that with art. They were religious people as well. They tended to portray religious scenes like the Annunciation. Here, the art is kind of distinctive in that it tends to have these kinds of faces that sort of leap out the page at you. The movement itself didn't last for very long, but left an influence of rather vivid use of colors and this distinctive appearance to art. In fact, some of the participants in this movement later became part of the arts and crafts movement, which also attempted to reject some of the ongoing developments. In the case of the arts and crafts movement, it was a rejection of mass production. So we have these kinds of rebellions of philosophy occurring. The way things were going was not the way that pleased some people, and they really wanted to hark back to an earlier era. But progress moves on, and in fact what came along later was not going back to some prior style, but inventing a new one, and we'll see that very shortly. So here we have with the Impressionists a couple of things that should be remembered in contrast to the art of the Academy. Realism was not realism just in the form that Caravaggio had talked about it, which was still studio art, showing a lot of natural features. Here, the intent was to go on out where the action was, natural lighting, and to create scenes there, and what the eye saw, not what the artist knew was there. And I'll explain that in a minute. So it should not be artificial, and you paint what you see. You don't fill in the details that are obscured in your viewing. Well, here's an example. Edouard Manet was one of the earlier artists, prior, in fact, to the era of Impressionism, but this painting was created when the movement was already in full swing. Here you see a reminiscence of that painting by Goya that we saw in a prior chapter, in the fact that there's this object here, this rail, that separates the viewer from the subjects. And we have sort of a mimicking here of the figure in the background of that Goya painting also, and the two figures looking more or less at us. But the thing that was criticized was the fact that when Manet did this, he didn't take care with things like this to fill in the shape of the nose that he knew the shape of. He did this in a way that the harsh lighting from the street produced a great deal of contrast in the face, and in fact this is the way his eyes saw it. It's not as if he felt it was his responsibility to paint all the details that were not visible in this view. So he's starting to depart from the traditions of the Academy in how pictures should be painted. But the formation of this more or less follows those old rules because there's some symmetry here, and it's a pleasing shape of a triangle, and it seems to sit nicely on the page. Here's another drawing, in this case by Manet. This is far different from what was normally accepted as a painting of some races. This is very action-driven, and he's even pictured himself standing on the racetrack with these horses hurtling at him. It's a hurried drawing, implying action, and he's also noticed that the horses have only two legs coming at us because the rear legs aren't visible. It kind of adds to the whole sense of tension and action.